Rwanda Assassins Without Borders with Michaela Wrong. With geopolitics. Good morning, my guest. Today is Michaela Wrong, who has just published the Max Milat edition, Assassins Without Borders. So we know Medicine Sans Frontières. We know other organizations. You're not really talking about an NGO, are you? No, actually, that's the book. Rwanda Assassins Without Borders. I chose the title because I'm very aware of all these NGOs. Aware of all these NGOs. I worked a lot with them as a journalist. But it's a book that really deals with the operation of intimidation and assassination carried out by the Rwandan government. By the Rwandan government, so I thought. That it was a good title because these are people, agents who are sent all over the world to kill people, sent all over the world abroad to target dissidents, Rwandan journalists, and also people working in human rights. So that was one way of talking about this operation. You. About Rwanda, about the cognitive dissonance that we have about Rwanda. Rwanda. Yes, indeed, because for me as a journalist, it's been a long time since I've been a journalist. I first went to Rwanda in '94, like many people, like many journalists, I had a good impression of the RPF. I thought that fortunately someone had put an end to the genocide. Put an end to the genocide. We saw this new government setting up in Kigali. It was a multi-ethnic government. There were Hutu politicians in it. There was talk of peace and reconciliation that had a good effect on me. But then what I saw was, as the years go by, we've seen a much darker, more sinister side to this movement, this organization, and I wanted to reflect that in my book. But I see that many other people, they don't want to admit that it's a government, a regime that has changed, or maybe there were a lot of things that we didn't realize in '94, when for us it was just the movement that put an end to the genocide, had put an end to the genocide. So, in fact, at the beginning, when you first visited here, attitude of positive appreciation of the Kagame government, it was as you went along it's only as time goes by that you change your judgment. Generally, in the Western media, it's very difficult to criticize Rwanda without being accused of denying the genocide. Well, yes, and that's what I was immediately accused of. Now I'm accused of being someone who denies the genocide. I find that really bizarre because I'm one of the reporters who wrote lots of papers on the genocide in '94, and you've got it, you. You've never denied the genocide. On the contrary, you've reported on it extensively. On the contrary, how could I do that since? Do that when I've seen the massacres with my own eyes. I've seen the bodies. I've seen the bodies. I've seen the bloodstains in the churches and schools. But I've seen the bodies. I've seen the bloodstains in the churches and schools. But that's an accusation that's immediately leveled at anyone who dares to criticize Paul Kagame, the current president of Rwanda. Kagame, the current president, or his policies in the Great Lakes countries. In fact, what I'm wondering is when I see the articles. Journalists who visit Kigali and describe Rwanda as the Switzerland of Africa. As the Switzerland of Africa, as a country that's clean, there's no rubbish and so on. There's no rubbish, etc. It's well run. Everything's going well. It's a democracy, and there are a lot of women MPs in Parliament, in the National Assembly, and I find that really we remain at such a superficial level. And I'm surprised that we don't see the fact that, for example, the leader of the opposition has spent 8 years in prison that she can't leave her house, that there are plenty of people who are in prison. She can't leave her house, that there are lots of journalists present, that in fact there's a whole assassination operation going on at the time. A whole assassination operation abroad carried out by Kigali in secret. But really, the most important thing now is the intervention and the operation. Eastern Congo, where we can see the damage really. The effect is very dramatic in the balance, but apparently we have nothing to say. My government, the French government, they don't want to express themselves openly, to express themselves openly and say to President Paul Kagame, you have to stop, must stop. Then there's Denis Mukwege, Nobel Peace Prize winner after all, who is a prominent from the Democratic Republic of Congo, who has treated women who have been victims of rape, regularly attract attention, um, but they preach a bit in the desert while being caught fishing news. Yes, indeed, Denis Mukwege, he always talks. He always talks about that. He always talks about the mapping report. I think he's right. Right, because what we saw in the mapping report, can you explain? What the mapping report is? The mapping report is a study carried out by the United Nations. United Nations, which came out in 2010. Investigators, they went on site and they described 617 incidents, atrocities, massacres committed by the rebels who were supported by Rwanda, but also by Rwandan forces, including the forests, Congo. And we've talked about we haven't given a figure, but we think that it's several hundred. Thousands of people were killed, and there was never any legal judicial follow up to this mapping report. And the doctor, the surgeon Denis Mukwege, he's still there saying, but we have this report. We need to see a judicial follow up. So you write in your book that you became the reality of vandalism, that you changed your mind when the South African Attorney General in South Africa was threatened in his own country, South Africa, for having or trying men accused of trying to assassinate General Kuchner to assassinate General Kuyamba. So a South African prosecutor was threatened in his own country, and yet South Africa is a giant. Yes, well, for me, it was a time when I decided that I didn't want to go there anymore. I didn't want to go to Rwanda anymore to investigate Rwanda because I did 4 years of investigation for my book. And at a certain point to finish my investigations, I wanted to go to Kigali. I'd already been there in 2016. I had done a lot of interviews in the Great Lakes, in South Africa, in Uganda, in Kenya, in the United States, and I wanted to go back there. And then I saw that this gentleman here, this gentleman who has a very important position in South Africa, and South African intelligence warned him that he was in danger because of his role in the trial of General Kayumba Nyamasa, the former head of the Rwandan army. No, he wasn't murdered. He was shot, but he's still alive. Shot at, but he's still alive. But he was nearly killed, and he was the victim of 5 attacks that he suffered in exile in South Africa. And at that point, when the Attorney General, who is afraid to go and present a paper and give a speech in his own country, I said to myself, but I'm going to. I'm not crazy. I'm not going to go to Rwanda to finish my investigations and interview the people, the last people. But for me, the road to that point was very long, and I began to have doubts in the years. Well, for me, the assassination of the Minister of the Interior was. It was also a triggering moment for me when I said to myself, but still, this RPF movement, this movement that talked about ethnic reconciliation, we see that it has just killed a Hutu minister of the interior who was really a symbol of this national reconciliation that we have been talking about. So for me, there were small steps, one after the other, and at a certain point, I realized that for me, it was a movement, the RPF, that frightened me. And I now think that it's one of the reasons why I was afraid of it. Now think it's one of the most repressive dictatorships in Africa. But it's extraordinary that the press in general doesn't realize this, and diplomats don't talk about it. Diplomats don't talk about it, and the people who work for the World Bank, the IMF, they don't accept it. They say it openly, but often in secret. Frank about it. Since the publication of your book, have you been threatened? Been threatened? Have you received any threats? Have you been the object of any threat? We know that other colleagues of yours have been threatened because of your work. I've written critically about Paul Kagame. Yes, indeed, there's a Canadian writer, Judy Reaver, whom I've written about. Writer Judy Reaver, who, when she went to Belgium, where I am now, research, she was given a police bodyguard, so to speak. Police bodyguard. That I haven't had that. I get around without any problems. What I see is that I'm being harassed and insulted on social networks. And that's completely typical because I've never seen an African government that's so active that uses at level devious and cynical social networks. So often you get the impression that there are a lot of Rwandans and others. I'm not going to say that Canada is an extraordinary country of citizens who I'm not going to say that Canada is an extraordinary country of citizens who don't like, for example, the things I say. But in fact, they're all anonymous accounts and we don't like them. Are all anonymous accounts. And we know that these are accounts that belong to the intelligence services in Kigali. And so there's always a campaign against people like me. A campaign against people like me. As soon as you say something, as soon as you make a comment about Rwanda that is a bit negative, there's an immediate reaction. There are articles in the New Times that it's the regime's newspaper in Kigali. Direct threats, I've only had them, but I don't take them seriously. What I see, anyway, is that as soon as there's someone like me who wants to present their book or organize a meeting with the Rwandan community or others, they often try to disturb or cancel it. Here's the Rwandan embassy, where there are groups of so-called groups of genocide survivors that they immediately phone the organizations, hotels, restaurants. You had to cancel a conference in Paris, by the way. Yes, we didn't really know what happened. It must have been cancelled. In South Africa, when I was invited by a South African institute, a think tank, we cancelled the same day. Of that, it was planned for my meeting because we were actually threatened by Rwandan officials for my meeting. Rwandan officials and the institute gave in, which really surprised and shocked me, I must say. So they do this systematically to prevent that people like me express themselves in public. You say that you know that your message, the one you deliver in your book, is going to be contested because you write it. Kagame is constantly finding new ways of making himself indispensable to his Western or even African allies. Yes, he does, and he does it. He's a very very clever. Um, and as soon as he senses that perhaps he's losing support in the West, um, he'll do something about it. Losing support in the West. Um, and I think he's got that feeling now in the United States, that American women are less and less. He finds a new friendship, a new partner, and indeed, I find that the whole relationship between Rwanda and France is very interesting because you could see that. In the 90s, really, Kagame, they had the worst things they said about France, and it's very interesting. France even tried to stop him once when he was in Paris. He was in Paris, um, and the relationship was really bad. And now we've they've become very close. Macron and Kagame have become very close and have formed an alliance. And we can see that France is counting on him for military support in the Sahel in Central Africa. Sahel, Central Africa, Mozambique. So I was thinking about Mr. Kissel. It's all about making yourself useful and often changing his relationships, his friendships, as soon as he has the feeling that he has lost an ally. Actually, what is very interesting too is his relationship with my own country, the United Kingdom, that at a certain point my government also expressed doubts, reservations on human rights in Rwanda, and we've seen that they're not very good. We saw that the British government signed a contract with Rwanda to receive and accept British asylum seekers. You talk a lot about Patrick Kareera Jaya, who was the head of the security services. A man who from the outset was linked to Kagame, who grew up in Uganda. He was assassinated, and you knew him very well. You knew very well. Yes, I knew him, as all the journalists knew him, because he was the person if we went to meet Paul Kagame to interview him. It was often Mr. Karaja who went out to greet journalists, because he understood. He's a very intelligent man, and understood that. Journalists can be useful to a small African government. They even went to the same school. They knew each other as children, as young rebels in Uganda. Together they formed the RPF in secret in Uganda, while they worked for Yoweri Museveni, the current Ugandan president, in his army, in the intelligence, and after a while he became more and more critical of Kagame. He didn't like the fact that there was a cult of personality, that the man was taking more and more power into his own hands, that there was no sharing of power, that there was constant conflict, there were military interventions in the Congo, and at one point he expressed himself very openly. Paul Kagame didn't want to accept it, and at one point they told him that his life was in danger. Get out of here. He had to get out of there. He fled and moved to South Africa. South Africa, he founded an opposition party, and he blatantly, openly denounced Kagame's dictatorship, and the end for him was when he walked into a hotel room in 2013 on the last day of the year, invited by someone he thought was a friend, a Rwandan businessman, and was strangled in the bedroom by a squadron of men sent from Kigali. So at that point, I think we understand that Paul Kagame's politics can be tough and ruthless because the man was his old friend. You described also a Paul Kagame who can't stand the slightest criticism and is capable of beating and humiliating in public those who are not sufficiently courting to him. Yes, indeed, it is said, I've been told several times, that he slaps the generals when he's not happy with the way the army has operated on the ground, that he humiliates the ministers, that if they are late for meetings, he kicks them. And I think we can see through his actions, his gestures, it's someone who used to having all he wants, and there's no one who dares really tell him, no, that's enough. You cannot tell him you're exaggerating. You can't say that in Rwanda today. So how do you explain that the DRC is a giant compared to Rwanda? But the DRC, the Congo army, the other one seems. Powerless compared to Rwanda and even South Africa, which is giant and not like DRC. How do you explain the fact that these two African giants are powerless in relation to Rwanda? Yes, well, there are different factors for the Congo and the DRC. I think we've seen that it's a powerless country which really doesn't have an army that counts. I think it's a powerless country that really doesn't have an army that counts for decades. I mean, I was based in Kinshasa in the last years of Mobutu, of Marshal Mobutu, and we understood at that time that the army was an army of predators soldiers who asked for bribes in the boulevards of Kinshasa. But it wasn't an army that could fight, and they were no match for the FPA. The FPA, that's for sure. So I think that this is still a problem that Felix Tshisekedi must try to resolve this problem, because we know that he is inviting foreign armies to come in and fight the M23, the rebel group, but it's because he cannot count in his own army. As far as South Africa is concerned, I think it's a different story. A different story. I think that South Africa, like the West, I think that it's a different story. Besides, they have a deep feeling of guilt because in '94 there was genocide and Africa did nothing. The Westerners, the United Nations, they started to withdraw their troops when the massacres started. And I think what I've understood from talking to the politicians in South Africa, the politicians in South Africa were saying for us it wasn't a good time to intervene because there were elections. We were entering a different chapter, a beautiful chapter in our history. And we're very aware that at that moment, Rwanda was entering hell and we did nothing. Did nothing. So I think they still have that feeling and they have a tendency to misunderstand. They tend to misunderstand what Paul Kagame's role was, what the RPF's role was, the role that the RPF played, rather like the Europeans, in fact. Yes, I was coming to that, in fact. So it's also the guilt over the initial inaction. In the face of genocide that explains the silence of Western countries, and particularly, as you said, France, which was very much the target. In order to redeem itself, finally, France accepts everything from Kagame so as not to be accused of having participated in the genocide as it has often been. Yes, and I think it's really a pity because, in my opinion, France is actually in the process of making the same mistakes that they made with President Abiyarimana. That is to say, he was a military dictator in terms of human rights. It was going to be a mistake. There was a toxic atmosphere. We were preparing for genocide. They were preparing for genocide. The West supported him. We supported him militarily too. And then afterwards, we're ashamed of that. And we have a guilty conscience. But in fact, France, for me, is doing exactly the same thing as it did. Kagame, a man who rigs elections, imprisoning journalists, with the blood of thousands of people on his hands, thanks to what his troops have committed in the forests of Congo. And yet, we absolutely want to have as a partner Rwanda and Paul Kagame, and I think it's the same mistake, and we're making it again. In the United States, however, there seems to be a more open debate, and the United States has obtained an agreement with Rwanda, and the United States have obtained the release of the hero of the film Hotel Rwanda, who had been the hero of the film Hotel Rwanda, who had been kidnapped abroad, tried for terrorism in Rwanda. Rwanda, he had American nationality, and so the United States intervened so that he could be released. The United States intervened so that he could be released after quite a long detention. Yes, he was a resident, but not an American citizen. Even so, the Americans made a real effort to free him. There was a whole very impressive family campaign. After the fact that there had been a film, it didn't hurt, because there were all these Hollywood celebrities who supported this campaign. There was all his family, and then at the end, there was the House of Representatives. In the end, there was the White House, the State Department, there were the American MPs who spoke out on the issue. And I find that when they want to exert pressure, they do so. And indeed, I think that this chapter has changed relations between the United States and Kagame, because before you could see that the United States was always the country that supported Kagame's regime financially and militarily. And now I think it's really no longer the same. It's not just thanks to the case of Paul Rousseff in Burkina, it's also the fact that the Americans, they see that Rwandan troops are in the process of destabilizing the whole of the Great Lakes region with the support of the 23 movement in Congo. So how do you see the situation developing? Because Kagame seems to be silencing all opposition. It's not possible to oppose him, so we don't see how. His power could be challenged from within, and at the same time, there's no challenge from outside either, so he's left to his own devices. The international community is not doing anything either, so we let him get on with it. Only a stronger government in the DRC could change things. Well, yes, that could change things. I also think that it's always someone who is really aware of his image, his reputation abroad, because he knows he's counting on that. He's a gentleman. It's still a very poor country, despite the impression that it feels like it's one of the poorest African countries. And I think that we as Europeans, the French, the British, are supporting this government financially. And you just have to let people know that it's not automatic. And I think that we could perhaps have a change of policy, because what we saw with the case of Paul Roos and Sabajina is that Kagame always shows himself to be very strong, very tough. I never change my policy, but as soon as there's a bit of pressure, he gives in. He changes his policy. Suddenly, anything is possible. And we saw that with the release of Paulo Rousseff in Basagina. So, as far as I'm concerned, it's obvious that if we want to see a bit of movement in the Eastern Congo with the movement of the 23rd, the West has to put pressure on Kagame and his regime in terms of financial and military support. Thank you, Michaela Wrong. I refer you to her book, Rwanda Assassins Without Borders, which has just been published by Max Milo. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.